Pontius Pilate was a figure of immense complexity, being one of the most controversial rulers in Roman history. Appointed by the Roman Empire as governor of Judea, a distant and rebellious province, Pilate was far from being an ordinary administrator. Its function was not only to guarantee peace and order, but also to represent the absolute authority and power of Rome over the subjugated peoples. His mission was simple in theory, but extremely difficult in practice, especially in Judea, where the Jewish people were obstinate in their faith and resistant to the impositions of the empire. The tension between Roman rule and the Jewish people was always present, with the empire imposing its laws and taxes, while the Jews tried, at all costs, to maintain their traditions and religious identity. For Pilate, a man with a more pragmatic and sometimes even arrogant temperament, this religious and political resistance was seen as an obstacle to his own peace and security as a ruler. However, he also knew that if he was not careful, an uprising could be enough to jeopardize his position and even his life. Thus, he was constantly trying to maintain control, playing off local political forces, religious intrigues, and the demands of the empire. When Jesus was brought to him, Pilate knew he was facing a highly delicate situation. Not only because of Jesus' fame, but also because of the tense political climate that surrounded any kind of public unrest, such as that which was occurring during Easter when tensions were at their highest. When asked about the fate of Jesus, Pilate found himself torn between pressure from the Jewish authorities, who called for his death, and the feeling that Jesus, in his own way, did not represent a real threat to Rome. Pilate was more concerned with the political consequences of his decisions than with the real merits of the case. Jesus' trial, therefore, was marked by hesitation and attempted political manipulation, which made the process even more complex and controversial. However, as the process unfolded, Pilate began to realize that Jesus was no ordinary criminal. During the interrogation, Jesus did not behave like a rebel leader, as Pilate expected. Instead of inciting violence or directly challenging Roman power, Jesus simply remained silent, accepting the judgment with a serenity that confused Pilate. This silence, for Pilate, was somewhat disconcerting, as he expected Jesus to defend himself or, at least, try to manipulate the situation to save his own life. The fact that Jesus did not contest the accusations, nor ask for clemency, made Pilate feel a certain frustration, but also a growing curiosity about the nature of this man. He began to realize that Jesus was not interested in fighting the Roman Empire, but rather in something much deeper and spiritual. For Pilate, this was both a relief and a concern. He did not see Jesus as a threat to Roman authority, but he also did not know how to handle the situation. Pilate tried to manipulate the situation in several ways, offering Jesus freedom in exchange for the freedom of a prisoner, in the hope that the people would prefer to free Jesus rather than Barabbas, the notorious criminal. But, as Pilate would soon realize, he was being manipulated by the religious leaders who controlled the crowd. Pilate's decision was not based on reason, but on his own political insecurity and fear of losing his position as governor. He did not have the power to challenge the Jewish authorities, especially Caiaphas and the other members of the Sanhedrin, and he feared that a revolt or a public crisis could result in serious consequences for him. Pilate's internal struggle between doing what was morally right and what was politically safe ultimately led him to make a deeply immoral decision. The dilemma faced by Pilate was a true internal battle between morality and politics. He knew that Jesus did not deserve death, but he also knew that by absolving Jesus he would be openly challenging the authority of the Jewish leaders, something that could result in a significant loss of his own authority and, eventually, personal danger. Pilate was aware that Roman politics and interests were the forces governing Judea and that disobeying these interests could lead to disastrous consequences. The fear that a revolt might break out and threaten the province's stability weighed much more heavily on his mind than the fate of a man he saw as harmless. Pilate was not being driven by justice or the search for truth, but by his need to preserve his power. He knew that if they gave in to pressure from religious leaders, he could secure himself as the ruler who maintained order in the region, but that meant sacrificing the life of an innocent man. By washing his hands of the sentence, Pilate cynically tried to exempt himself from blame, transferring responsibility to others. But this action, far from being a gesture of disinterest, was a conscious decision to protect himself politically and avoid conflict with the Jewish authorities. Pilate did not have the courage to challenge the injustice before him, nor the willingness to pay the price for doing what he knew was right. His decision to allow Jesus to be put to death was a selfish choice, motivated by fear, vanity, and a lack of courage to take a morally correct stand. Jesus' condemnation to crucifixion was, for Pilate, an act of political expediency, but for Christianity, this event represented one of the most crucial moments in human history. Pilate, by allowing the crucifixion, believed he was resolving a political issue and avoiding a larger conflict. However, he was participating in something much bigger than he could comprehend. For Christians, Jesus' death on the cross was not just an execution, but the divine sacrifice that allowed the salvation of humanity. Pilate, with his pragmatic stance and his quest to preserve his power and status, did not understand the deep spiritual meaning of his actions. He was just fulfilling a political function, but without knowing it, he was participating in the realization of a divine plan. To him, Jesus was just another religious leader causing a stir, but to Christians, he was the Son of God, the Savior of the world. Pilate's dilemma, between saving Jesus and securing his own position, is a reflection of human nature to be guided by self-interest, fear, and vanity, rather than seeking truth and justice. Pilate may have washed his hands in a symbolic gesture, but in fact, he immersed himself further in the shadows of politics and injustice. Thus, Pontius Pilate is portrayed not as a victim of circumstances, but as a man who chose to sacrifice truth and justice for the sake of his own political security and social status. His decision to sentence Jesus to death reflects the deep corruption of political power and the fear of challenging forces he could not control. While Pilate saw his choice as a means of avoiding a greater crisis, Christianity sees this same choice as the fulfillment of a divine plan, where Jesus' sacrifice on the cross would become the turning point for the redemption of humanity. Jesus' condemnation was a moment of great human injustice, but, paradoxically, it was also the moment when the greatest work of mercy and divine love was accomplished. For Pilate, his decision was pragmatic and political, but for the world, it was the key to eternal salvation. If you liked this video, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any news. Leave your like and share with your friends so we can spread this message of reflection. Your participation is very important for us to continue bringing relevant content to you all.